If you read his writings, the words that constantly appear are manhood, manliness. Be a man, says Gandhi. Be a man at most by taking the blows. But if you can't, you better hit back and hit back hard. The fundamental thing to be borne in mind, says Gandhi, is that people should, under no circumstances, be cowardly or impotent. It is unmanly to run away from danger. And nothing filled him with more disgust than people who used nonviolence to mask their cowardice. For those of you, or weakness, for those of you who've read Nietzsche, his genealogy of morals, he's exactly on the same page with Nietzsche on this question. Nietzsche detests those Christian ethics which weak people adopt because they don't have the courage to hit back. And Gandhi says, word for word, the exact same thing. I ask you, says Gandhi, is our nonviolence the nonviolence of the coward, the weak, the helpless, the timid? In that case, it is of no value. A weakling is a born saint. A weak person is obliged to become a saint. But we are soldiers of nonviolence, who, if the occasion demands, will lay down their lives for it. If one makes use of nonviolence in order to disguise one's weakness, it makes a coward of you. Using physical force with courage is far superior to cowardice. At least we would have attempted to act like men. I cannot stand cowardice. Let no one say when I am gone that I taught the people to be cowards. If you think my nonviolence amounts to that or leads you to that, you should reject it without hesitation. I would far rather that you died bravely dealing a blow and receiving a blow than died in abject terror. Cowardice is worse than violence because cowards can never be nonviolent. So such people should learn to defend themselves. Gandhi saw no inconsistency between his creed of nonviolence and his revulsion of weakness, because in his view, being nonviolent requires a lot more courage and bravery than to be violent. Intuitively, that just doesn't sound right. But then when you begin to read Gandhi, it makes perfect sense. Because he says to be truly nonviolent is to be willing to march into the valley of death, unarmed, as he puts it, smilingly and cheerfully. To be willing to face the bullets, face your death, but not armed to resist, not armed to retaliate, but simply to acquiesce in your death. I believe that a man is the strongest soldier for daring to die unarmed with his breast bare before the enemy. Where is courage required, he asked, in blowing others to pieces from behind a cannon, or with a smiling face to approach a cannon and to be blown to pieces? By that standard, it seems to me a reasonable argument to say there's no inconsistency between Gandhi's revulsion of weakness and cowardice and his preference for nonviolence, but always bearing in mind the true Gandhi and not the Hollywood or made-for-television Gandhi. The true Gandhi, if you don't have it in you to march smilingly and cheerfully to your death, unarmed, and the only choices are to run away or to hit back hard, Gandhi says, you better hit back hard or you're a weakling and a coward. How does this satyagraha work? Well, here Gandhi is a little bit, I think, not a little bit, he's very inconsistent. Because Gandhi is very insistent, as I said a few moments ago, that his philosophy is one born of love. You suffer enough, you'll make your oppressor see your humanity, and as Gandhi liked to say, make his, because he was mostly talking about men, make his heart melt. So Gandhi would say, had the Jews suffered enough during World War II, they could have, to use his image that he uses over and over again, they could have made Hitler's heart melt. Hitler heart melt sounds like an unusual sequence of words, but Gandhi apparently believed it. But if you look at his actual creed in action, he's really not very consistent, because a large part of his actual creed in action is what he calls non-cooperation. Non-cooperation is what we would nowadays call a strike or a general strike. Workers walk out of their plant, they refuse to cooperate, or a whole society refuses to cooperate with a government. But when you walk off your job, you go on strike, or a whole population goes on a general strike, they're obviously not trying to evoke love from their opponents. It's being coercive. You're trying to get your employer or your government to recognize that the costs are too high and it's preferable to settle. That's not love. That's coercion. It's not violent coercion, but it is coercion. Even if you take at the other extreme the most self-suffering form of action, say a fast until the death. Gandhi had many quarrels with his critics who insisted to him, Gandhi, who are you kidding? You know full well that when you go on a fast, you're not moving your opponent from from love. It's coercion. You're coercing them to give in to your demands because you're threatening. If you don't give in, I'm going to die. And if I die, this whole society is going to break into civil revolt. That's coercion. And so even fasting, which seems like the ultimate form of self-suffering, Gandhi would deny it and make all sorts of explanations, but it clearly has a coercive element. Just as those of you who are parents, when the holiday season comes around and your child says to purchase this gift for him or her, or he or she will hold his or her breath till they're blue and they die, that's coercive unless you're indifferent to your child's fate. I want to say just a few words which are crucial about Gandhi's doctrine of self-suffering. I have to make one main point, and then I want to move on to the Israel-Palestine conflict. That is, self-suffering can't possibly work as a tactic unless there is agreement on the goal which you are pursuing. That is to say, you can't just be innocent in your means, nonviolence, but you have to also be innocent in your ends. That is to say, the goal of your nonviolence has to be recognized as legitimate by society. In practice, what does that mean? Take the case of the United States. In the U.S., our country is about divided, they say, 50-50 on the question of abortion. About 50% of our society is pro-choice. About 50% of our society is pro-life. If you were to have, engage in a little thought experiment and imagine if the 50% of the people in our society who are pro-life were to descend on all the abortion clinics in the United States, surround the clinics and say, we are going to go on a fast until the death unless abortion is illegalized. The pro-life people, the pro-choice people, at best, will be moved to pity the pro-life people. They may be moved to pity, and that's also a big maybe. But it's inconceivable that even if the pro-life people fasted unto the death, the pro-choice people would relinquish the right to abortion. Self-suffering can only work if society at large has already agreed latently or blatantly that the goal you're pursuing is legitimate. And if the goal you're pursuing is seen as legitimate, then your aim is to try to get the public to act on what its conscience already tells it is wrong. A lot of people know things are wrong, but they don't act on them. And then the purpose of the self-suffering, the fast, and other forms of civil disobedience is to use Gandhi's image to quicken the conscience, to awaken the conscience to the fact that what's happening is wrong. It can't be avoided anymore. It can't be evaded anymore because these people are out there suffering and they're making the wrong known. And then hopefully people will act. That's his expectation. And as I say, the expectation hinges on the public recognition that there's something wrong. And Gandhi was very clear on that. Whenever he undertook a campaign, for example, to rid Hinduism of what he called the blot of untouchability, or to rid India of the scourge of alcoholism. When people would ask Gandhi, why alcoholism and not other vices, his answer was very straightforward. He would say, the drink evil, alcoholism, has been recognized as such by the people of this land, but the other evils are more or less fashionable. Gandhi is a practical reformer. He changes, He changes what can practically be changed. And what in his mind can practically be changed are those violations of human rights, morality, where society already recognizes latently, not necessarily at the forefront of their consciousness, that there is a wrong here. Having said that, let me now turn to the Israel-Palestine conflict and see what we can learn or apply from Gandhi. First of all, a couple of qualifications again. No one has the right to tell Palestinians that they must renounce violent means to end the occupation. Why? It's the Gandhian standard. According to the accepted canons of right and wrong, people are allowed to use violence to oust occupiers. Of course, according to current standards, that means you cannot target civilians. That's part of current right and wrong being what's embodied in what's called humanitarian law or human rights law, a fundamental principle of which is you cannot target civilians. But apart from that crucial qualification, every other people is allowed to use violence to evict occupiers. No one has the right to tell Palestinians they cannot. Number two, using the Gandhian standard, not my own, if Palestinians cannot find the moral reserves to practice nonviolence, then according to the Mahatma, it is not only their right, but their duty to hit back and hit back hard those who have wrecked their lives and violated their persons. Palestinians are not obliged to acquiesce in assaults on their human dignity. Quite the contrary, they have a responsibility to defend their dignity against such assaults.